Thank you very much, Marta, for this nice introduction. And of course, I was very touched by the homage to Professor Carter, which was a pupil of Helmut Schelsky, who was himself a pupil of Arnold Gehlen, of who I will be speaking a lot today. So yeah, it was certainly part of this story in more than one way. And also, yeah, thank you for the introduction. I would really advise my colleague to go to the Center for Figurational Research, because it's very nice to meet face to face also with colleagues from time to time. And Warsaw is very a practical city to navigate. So don't fear anything. So, as you said, my presentation deals with the history of conservative thought, with a big question in mind about the reciprocal influence between the evolution of conservative ideas and the social sciences. So this is, of course, not a new question. And one of the first to raise this question was Karl Mannheim. And more precisely, he asked how he showed, actually, in his famous book on conservatism, how the contents of conservative ideas were transformed to give birth to a distinct mode of observation, which we would call now, which we would characterize as sociological. So before I come back briefly to Mannheim, I will give you a short overview of my presentation, which will be basically in three parts. So first, I will come back more on the theoretical framework I am using in this particular research, which I have been working on for about a short year now, and which I intend to, of course, to continue in the future. Second, I will focus on these early years in the Federal Republic of Germany, through, in particular, the debates that opposed two major figures of conservative thought at the time, Hans Freyer and Arnold Gehlen. And I will try to justify why I think we should take seriously the idea that there exists something as a post-historical conservatism. I will try to construct an ideal typical definition of what is post-historical conservatism. And third, I will try to show how this post-historical conservatism fueled actually later trends or later debates in the contemporary social sciences. So first of all, so I do not need to recall to this audience who Karl Mannheim was, or what was his relationship with Norbert Elias. So Karl Mannheim and Norbert Elias had a quite close relationship until 1933. But I would like to outline briefly two elements of the thesis that he presents in this book, which was published by Surkamp under the title Conservatismus, but whose original title is actually Conservative Thought. So actually the French version, La Pensée Conservatrice, is a bit, sticks more to the original title of the article. So two elements stands out in this book, where Mannheim tries to make a genealogy of conservative thought from its inception at the turn of the 18th and 19th century to the late 19th century. The first one is that Mannheim thinks of conservative thought as a style of thought, so that's his word, which finds its historical locus, that's also like a Mannheimian word, in the transformation of the system of social positions that gave a self-evident meaning to tradition. So that's what he calls the Standish universe. So in several places, it makes clear that it is only through a process of becoming free of anchor that some individual thinkers were able to develop a capacity of observation of their own society through what he calls an ideology. So conservatism is, for Mannheim, in his terminology, an ideology as well as so it's an ideology like socialism, but it's different from mere traditionalism, which was the attitude that most people adopted when the system of social positions was still stable. So it is essentially a modern mode of self-comprehension of society. So this is a very specific standpoint, which is akin also to the sociological mode of observation of society. And so this is the second point. There is a reciprocal evolution of the social sciences and conservative thought in building a dynamic comprehension of the historical process. So it is very important here to see that Mannheim isolates actually within conservatism a mode of thinking, of observing society that will later be taken on by the social sciences in order to provide a more accurate or a more reality congruent, to use Eliasian terms, apprehension of the historical process. So in a way, the critical stance taken by conservative against the static philosophical construction of the Enlightenment allows to knowledge through progress, allows a gain in realism, again, allows to gain, sorry, a more realistic perspective on the historical process. So there is, I will, to summarize, kind of dual perspective in Mannheim's. I would say the first one is what we could term classically a historical sociology perspective. And a prime illustration of this perspective is, of course, the first chapter of Norbert Elias, The Civilizing Process, where basically Elias takes the conservative opposition between culture and civilization, so between culture and civilization, to show that it is historically determined, that it comes from a particular evolution in the historical development of the German state and the relationship, the figuration that formed the German state and the German society. And a second perspective, which I think is more closely associated with Mannheim and from which Norbert Elias, I think Norbert Elias basically broke up with this perspective, is the perspective of the sociology of knowledge, which is more philosophical in a way, which we ask questions which are also shared by political philosophy, political theory and philosophy, which is basically following questions. So how does knowledge progresses, and how is the emergence of social sciences linked to the political constitution of modernity? Just to cite a few of these questions. So in my research, I actually try to do to join both perspectives, maybe with not with equal success, but we can discuss about it later. So my first objective will be to build an ideal typical definition of a post-historical conservatism. And from this ideal typical construction, I will try to isolate the elements that help us gain critical insights on the use of history in social sciences in general. So in order to do this research project, my empirical strategy was in three steps broadly. So first of all, I'm of course using a classically interpretative strategy of by actually reading text interventions of conservative social scientists, by trying to reconstruct the debates they had. So this is the first step, and this is basically what I will be presenting. I already did some archival research, but which is still exploratory. So I will also try to show you and to tell you a bit more about what we can find in the archives, what is interesting there. And a third step would be more to formalize these first two steps into with the help of sociographical tools, and to reconstruct the networks and the different channels through which this conservative thought, I basically structured itself in the Federal Republic of Germany. So for those who read the abstract already know, I will focus in this presentation on a very specific moment in the history of conservative thought. So, namely, the transformation of conservatism in West Germany after 1945. So, can you still hear me? Yes. So, why did I choose such an empirical focus? So, there are several reasons but the most important, in my opinion, is that precisely this transformation, as I will try to show, stands at the crossroad of different ideological undercurrents. The more important of which is, of course, the intellectual movement of the so-called conservative revolution, which is represented by intellectuals such as Carl Schmitt, for instance, but I will also talk about a few others, and principally of Hans Freyer. So with regard to the particular relationship between sociology and conservatism and conservative ideas, the specific interest of this constellation is, above all, that it integrates the inheritance of the conservative revolution on the one hand, but that it also takes back older debates that already took place in the 20s, but were mostly interrupted by the war, about the value of historical inquiry for the social sciences and for philosophy. So I would argue that through its still confrontational stance with a liberal democratic political system in an industrialized society, conservatism produced a new articulation between sociological analysis and political action. So I claim that on the basis of this transformation, we can build an ideal typical definition of conservatism that I name post-historical conservatism, in reference to Arnold Galen's concept of post-histoire. So, I will first present the the debate actually that took place within German conservative social scientists in the roughly in the decade after the foundation of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. And I will focus on two, in order to reconstruct the polarities and the dynamic of this particular debate. I will focus on two thinkers. So the first one on the left is Hans Freyer, and the second one is Arnold Gehlen. First of all, I will yeah. So first of all, I will introduce. So maybe I can present them jointly to start with, because of course they have strong biographical links. They were both born in Leipzig. They collaborated throughout from the 1920s onward, and they were both early adherent and supporters of the NSDAP, and they pursued their career through the National Socialism. So Hans Reyer, of course, was the older of the two. So he held the first chair of sociology, actually the first chair, which in Germany was exclusively a chair of sociology at the University of Leipzig from 1925 onwards. And he was a supporter of the revolution from the right. Right? So one of his books, actually from 1931, is entitled Revolution von Rechts, so a revolution from the right. And he states in this book that the necessity that the task of sociology is to uncover the higher will of the community as the source of social structures. So that is law, organization, etc., etc. So this higher will of the community, the will to form a community, is actually that's what Freyer argues a precondition of sociological inquiry. So it is also an argument he makes at the end of Soziologie als Wirklichkeitswissenschaft, which can be regarded as one of his opus magnum, which he published in 1930, and which is basically polemic against Karl Mannheim, among others, but above all against what we can call what is seen as historicism. That is the fact that all social reality must be constructed as particularly historical constructs, and that they should be given meaning in relation to what comes after and what comes before. So, in a way, Hans Reyer can be taken as a really a prime example of what is the intellectual current of the conservative revolution, because he was that also bore unforgiving critic against the use of historicism in the social sciences. And this is, of course, a general critique that we find in other conservative thinkers. For instance, if we go after the war in the work of Karl Leuwitz. Karl Leuwitz, who was a philosopher who emigrated because of his Jewish origins during the war, but who came back after the war, who translated some of his work after the war in German, and who also relaunched through a major book called Meaning in History in English, Unforgiving Attack Against Historicism. So I just want here to I make this slight allusion to Leuwitz because for me is very representative also of the debates that took place after the war around historicism and the social sciences, where there was basically a conflation between the philosophies of history, the Enlightenment, which were accused of actually pushing the world into a situation of absolute chaos and of encouraging relativism. So this is actually also, I think, the positions of Hans Freyer, who after the war, or at least the original position of Hans Freyer, who after the war was barred from teaching at the university, but still had important publishing activity. So I just put here one of his book, Weltgeschichte Europas, which was published in 1947. So what are his positions after the war? Basically, it underwent, as Jerzy Müller has shown in a very good book from 1988, a process of deradicalization, or at least of abandonment of the revolutionary element in the conservative revolution. And he wrote mainly on the question of the industrial society, with a central question, with a central questions that can be formulated as following. So does the autonomous legislation, so I translated the German Eigengesetzlichkeit. It is a translation that was used recently in an article, so I thought it was a good way to translate this expression. So does the autonomous legislation of industrial society suppress the historical agency of the particular nations? So in other words, will the ever-expanding industrial process, which knows no geographical limit, will make the political will of individual nations obsolete. So Hans Reyer's response to this question is negative, actually. For him, there are untapped historical resources that can be used to form new political wills. So Hans Reyer used geological metaphor for history, actually. He says that history is formed by stratification of different elements, and that just like, for instance, oil can be taken out from the earth to furnish energy. Some spiritual energies lie untapped in the ground and will sometimes come back and form new political wills. So for the citation I put in the abstract about the civilizing process is actually very illustrative of this point, that even though there is an industrialization that goes globally around and knows no national borders, the subjects of this story remain the individual nations, and they have all every individual nation have their own way of organizing and of competing through the appropriation of industrialization. So this stance is interesting because it shows how conservatism takes up more classical elements when it abandons its revolutionary stance. In particular, Hans Reyer, maybe surprisingly, anticipates what will become known later as a conservative liberal trend by offering a defense of a sphere of individual freedom as a counterweight to the dissolving forces of individualization. So, as long as politics is kept into a certain measure, which is commensurate to the individual, it remains well, it's as long as as long as politics encourage individual freedom and initiative, there will be no catastrophe, and it will keep in check the dissolving forces of industrialization. So it is also notable to see that for Freyer, he also abandons the revolutionary elements by stating that the spiritual forces can't be tapped in and can't be mobilized willingly or instrumentally, if you will. So there is a form of quietism in Freyer that will later be criticized by Galen. So I now turn to Galen, which was institutionally far more important, a far more important figure than Freyer after the war, although he too was limited in his teachings because he only managed to obtain new positions. So first in high school for administration in Speyer, and then at the technical university in Aachen. So it can be, so he was a university professor before and during the war. So it can be seen as a kind of of a step backward for him to teach in a high school or in a technical university in Aachen. But some of you who are familiar with the history of the social sciences in Germany know that actually the High School for Administration in Speyer was a very active center in promoting new sociological methods throughout the 20th century. And in particular, he had a great influence through his pupils, and most notably Helmut Schelsky, who himself became a professor in Münster, and there was also like, so the rest is his history, as we say, but he was also the first one to invite Norbert Elias in Germany, and he had a great role in the formation of, an important role in the formation of a new generation of sociologists. And together with Helmut Schelsky, he was the director of, or the co-editor of the first West German Handbook of Sociology in 1955. So he too had an important publishing activity. I will not cite all his work he published after the war. But I just want to come back on some of the positions he took in more or less polemical tone against Freier's position. So first of all, he categorically rejects the latest reinterpretation of the conservative revolution in the sense that is affirmative of the state of things and, according to Gehlen, politically important. So he makes that clear, for instance, in a review of Freier's book, Theory des, I will switch to German now. So Theorie des gegenwärtigen Zeitalters, so Theory of the Present Times, which was published in 1957. And Gehlen, in this review, he states that, contrary to what Freyer thinks, there are no spiritual resources to be tapped into from where conservatism can regenerate itself. He basically diagnoses that there is an exhaustion from these resources in the case of West Germany. The absence of Rinascimento, so this is a Gehlian term in particular, seems to be a sign that the German people doesn't exist anymore as politically, as a historically active subject. He makes a similar diagnosis in Die Seele in Technischen Zeitalter, a book which came out the same year, 1957, where he extends basically this diagnosis to all the formerly great civilization. So he says that there is not any nation on earth anymore, but only formless, so formless people wandering on the surface of on earth. So this is a very pessimistic diagnosis in a way, and in another, I want now to turn to another article which he published in 1952 on the birth of freedom from alienation, where he diagnoses, well, it is a strange article because it begins as a classical account of the destructive potential of the Enlightenment, which goes through different historical phases. So first from the economic realm with Marx to the psychological realm with Freud. And at the end, he seems to, he makes the hypothesis basically that the destructive potential of the Enlightenment is exhausted. So there is an exhaustion of the Enlightenment, and the era of the Enlightenment is over, and it makes way to post-histoire. So this is the first time where Gehlen, his first occurrence in his work of post-histoire, a term he used in French. So for several reasons. The first one is that he draws on a French philosopher, Raymond Rouillet. I can come back to that later, but also because, of course, the term Nachgeschichte in German is already part, in a way, of the Marxist tradition, and that he couldn't really afford, I think, to steal this concept from the Marxist tradition. But more importantly, in this article, The Birth of Freedom from Alienation, he already makes clear that for him, the task of sociology is to reveal the big worldviews and philosophies of history. So that accompanied the development of the Enlightenment as a manifestation of a transitional consciousness. That is, that it is only a temporary phenomenon. It is just due to the absence of stabilization of the relationship between the individual and the technical organization, and that it will be the near future bears the promise of the post-histoire, that is, a stabilization of technical progress through routinized institutions. In order to maybe go a little deeper on this post-historical on this concept of post-history, and why, for me, it is an important concept that actually allows to define a whole set of conservative ideas. This is so what you see now is so the famous, no, not so famous as Luhmann, but the famous Zettelkasten of that Gehlen used to write. So he wrote on this kind of a little. So this is kind of the format of the original format of these little notes, and so he had a whole repertory with a different concept and all. So this is actually the one we on post-histoire. And so there are different citations, right, from different times. So they were not all written at the same time, of course. But I think the more important is the one you see on the upper left, actually in blue ink, right? Because it actually indicates what is the main source of post-histoire for Gehlen, which is French philosopher Raymond Ruyet, which himself actually makes a thesis on Cournot, a French economist of the 19th century. So this explains why he uses the term post-histoire in French, I think. And it is very interesting because in his book, actually, Ruyet presents Cournot as one of the father of a tradition in sociology that also counts Saint-Simon, for instance, by diagnosing the final stabilization of humanity under a perfect administrative state. And this is, of course, an idea that is seductive for Gehlen, because in a way the technical refinement of administration can compensate for the lack of purpose of higher motives that the Enlightenment produced in the individuals. So it's just there is kind of a trade-off in a way, that of course humanity will become so you can see the words that are written here, like nonchalance, facilité, etc., scandal. So it will become humanity of mainly consumers, but we will live peacefully under a perfect administrative state. This is just to give you some historical elements. There are, of course, other concepts which are referred to here that I could come back to. But in intermediary conclusion, I want to to make a bit of a synthesis of what post-historical conservatism should be or could be if we try to achieve an ideal typical definition of conservatism. So first of all, we could ask why is post-historical conservatism politically conservative? So that could have been a step we could have taken up earlier. But one definition of conservatism that I like to use, and it doesn't come from me, but from Céline Join, so I didn't put it in the PowerPoint, but if it's recorded, I want to cite my colleague Céline Join, which basically states that any conservative idea has to face the following dilemma, that it has to justify rationally authority on the one hand, so it is a rational inquiry into the sources of authority, right? But on the other hand, this authority can only be preserved if it isn't submitted to discussion. So it must, in a way, always find a way around the democratic moment that is constitutive of modernity, all the while taking up the idea that history can be the object of a rational knowledge, actually. So I think it's a very fruitful definition because that is actually what we see here. It's a solution to this problem. And it's actually specifically, I would argue, a specifically sociological solution, which is different from instance from the philosophical solutions that could be that we can evidence, for instance, in the work of Leo Strauss, which would consist in separating the true sciences from the sciences that would be addressed to the masses and where actually science would be organized into a double discourse, right? And I would say that in a way, this is just notice that you are approaching 40 minutes. Okay, so I will conclude. So I think that's also where we can use post-historical conservatism as a critical tool because it forces sociological theories to justify the democratic moment or why democracy is necessary or wishable. And I think that in a way Habermas was a great reader of Galen, and I think a whole part of his work is dedicated actually to answering this challenge. And to move away, of course, from anthropological premises, because the anthropological premises take all the place in Galen's, and that explains also the very, very conservative stance he adopts. And I would say also, in conclusion, that paradoxically, in a way, post-historical conservatism also offers a motive, a political motive, to pursue historical inquiry in order to discover the conditions that can lead to the successful stabilization of society. So it's paradoxically also a new way to justify why sociology should use history, actually, and not sever all ties with history. So I will maybe leave it there, and we can talk about the subsequent evolution of this post-historical conservatism in the discussion, if you want. All right? Thank you very much.